Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening. Let's see who we have on tonight. We have AM, great to see you, AM. Adrian, great to have you on. Enzo the God, great to see you. CGM, great to see you too. Hope you're well. Gertian, great to see you. Tiny Demolition Lover, great to have you on. Hope you're well. Killer, great to have you on. Hope you're well too. We have Tom, great to see you. Two Toms, hope both of you are well. We have Lenan, great to see you. We also have Inconsequential, great to have you on once again. You and me, great to see you. Adam, great to have you on. We also have, let me see, Raven 1983 Witch, great to have you on too. Hope you're well. Mark Tefler, great to have you on once again, Mark. We also have Bishton, great to have you on. Catherine Jones, great to see you, Catherine. Gally, great to have you on. And so many more. Hope you're all very well this evening. And we have a super chat from Valerio. Thank you so much, Valerio. Hi, Max. I started to be concerned about monkeypox. I don't know if it's... I haven't really been following the outbreak. There's been talk of a vaccine. I'm not sure of all the details of it. I don't know if it's as serious as people say, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be causing too much concern. But we'll have to keep an eye on that, of course. I see Artemis. Great to see you, Artemis, on the stream. Hope you're well. The Highlander. Great to see you too. So I hope everyone is very well. Now, of course, we're back in Boris Johnson. Is he going to stay or will he go? Territory once again. The idea that new pictures have been released, and you've probably seen those. At least one of them being him holding up a glass of something, maybe wine, toasting somebody who was leaving number 10. And look, it seems that there may have been parties on a weekly basis, not just 10 or 12 parties, but every week there was a party. This is not surprising anymore. We all knew that Boris Johnson doesn't give a crap about the rules. The rules do not apply to him. Looking back at his Eton days, the rules do not apply to him. So when he became Prime Minister, did people truly believe that he would act differently? Of course not. There's a number of things I just want to highlight here. And one story that just popped out is completely unrelated. I just want to highlight that as well. But it says here, Johnson would throw his entire team under a bus to survive PartyGate. But Boris Johnson would throw everyone and anyone under a bus just to protect himself. Not just over PartyGate, but over anything. So it says, after a clip from the reshuffle in Downing Street earlier this year, Klinsberg is told by Will Walden, a former staff member of Boris Johnson's when he was Mayor of London, that he would burn people, and because of his personality as a loner, he finds burning people easy. And it was just said, he's a nice guy, but he knows where the bodies are. He will be cutthroat to protect his own interests. When asked what he would do to protect his interests, she says, I think he would throw his entire team under a bus to survive this. And yes, he will. So it's typical of Johnson to find a scapegoat, find a sacrificial lamb. Someone will have to walk the plank. Somebody will receive their P45 and in order to protect Johnson. But I think we're even past that at this stage. He's just going to weather this. Yes, there are more pictures. Yes, he broke the rules. Yes, he broke the law. But what are you going to do about it? The media will rant and rave about it for a few days, and then we'll move on to something else. And, there's talk also about him triggering Article 16 to distract, or at least threaten to trigger Article 16 to distract from this. And he probably will do something like that. We've been here before. Talk of him resigning or being forced out, letters flowing into the 1922 committee, and then within a few days we've moved on to something else, and then we're back to this again. So we've been here before, and nothing really comes of it, I'm afraid. The reason, like many people say, it's because of public attitude or whatever. No, it's something much more simple. There's no replacement for him. So the Tories don't have a natural replacement for Johnson. look, he's not. He's a little bit damaging to the brand, but there isn't an election taking place at the moment. So there's no real reason for him to go. There's no real benefit in getting rid of him. Just leave him there. Yes, he's somewhat damaging, tarnishing the Tory brand, but as I said, there's no one to replace him. If there was somebody charismatic who would be ready to jump in and redirect the party in another direction, yes, I'm pretty sure the Tories would jump for that, but there isn't. And we also have to go back to 2019 and getting Brexit done. Somebody who's going to replace Johnson would have to go against that. Would have to come out and say, yes, Brexit was a mistake, or Boris Johnson's type of Brexit was a mistake, it was wrong, and we're going to undo that. That's what you would require from a new leadership, not more of the same. And there's no one willing to do that. They're all afraid. They're all afraid of the B word, and definitely afraid of criticizing it. Even people who were Remainers, people who are against Brexit within the Conservative Party, are not criticizing Brexit to any great extent. Mr. Peter, thanks so much for that super chat. In what sort of jobs do people sit on each other's laps asking for a friend? Yeah, so this is something that was mentioned in this article here. It says, leaving drinks attended by Prime Minister so cramped people sat on others' laps and bins overflowed with bottles, Number 10 staff say. The latest reports about parties in Downing Street include the attendees ending up sitting on each other's laps because of how cramped it was inside the gatherings. Officials spoke to BBC Panorama programme due to air at 7 p.m. on BBC Two, said that they would sometimes arrive at work to find bins overflowing with empty bottles. A security guard tried to stop one party taking place, was laughed at. It's like, you shouldn't be really having a party here. But this is Boris Johnson who's in charge. Boris Johnson has, he has given it the go ahead. So get lost. And, that's... Now, the response from the Tories is, oh, well, this is a terrible atmosphere or an awful atmosphere in Number 10. And this is, this is not Boris Johnson's fault. It's how Number 10 operates. Yes, but who is ultimately responsible for Number 10? It's the Prime Minister. He's the one who chooses the people who organise events at Number 10. He's the one who chooses who's running the show at Number 10. And and obviously he has to take ultimately responsibility for that. So this idea of, it's a particular atmosphere or a party atmosphere or it's a very informal atmosphere at Number 10. But that's a lame excuse, because who is ultimately responsible? Boris Johnson. The Mayor of London said has asked the Metropolitan Police why Johnson was not fined for attending Lee Kane's leaving drinks on the 13th of November 2020, from which photographs have emerged. Others who attended were fined. So if somebody who attended this party was fined and Boris Johnson was not fined, even though Boris Johnson was attending the party, why was he not fined? Because there are allegations that Number 10 put pressure on the Metropolitan Police not to issue more fines to Johnson because it would be embarrassing. So Boris Johnson doesn't have to suffer the consequences of the law because it would be embarrassing. Can you imagine that? Imagine that happening to anyone. You're stopped for speeding and you say to the police, please don't fine me because it'd be very embarrassing for my job. I'm a sales rep, and if they find out that I was speeding, or I'm a what do you call it? A school driving instructor and I was caught for speeding. Please don't tell anyone and please don't fine me, because if I receive a fine, it'll be embarrassing. And the police would say, okay, we're not going to fine you. Can you imagine in any other situation where you could ask the police not to fine you? Thanks for that super chat, Peter. Fearless Wolf, there was no party. Gove wasn't there. Yes. if Michael Gove was not there, then it wasn't a party. we've seen his moves. We've seen him on the dance floor. We've seen him, when he's been at the white stuff. So yeah, it's not a party unless Michael Gove is there. Thanks for that, Fearless Wolf. Reagan Elite says Sky Sources, government poised to announce multi-million-pound cost of living package, including new windfall tax. There we go. Thanks for that super chat, Reagan Elite. And there we go. There's the distraction. The photos and all of this is embarrassing for Boris Johnson. We're going to help people out. We've been waiting for weeks. We've waiting for months before actually deciding to do anything. And now, what a coincidence, that Boris Johnson's in some hot water and there is a new package, a multi-billion-pound package to help people during the cost of living crisis, and a windfall tax as well, something that the Tories have said they would probably not impose on these companies, because these companies would allegedly not invest in new technologies or new sites for for extracting gas or oil or whatever, which these companies have said, no, it's not going to affect us. It will not affect our investments if there was a windfall tax. So there we have it. Thanks for that, Reagan. There is the distraction, and it'll probably work. Yes, Boris Johnson's going to give us an extra, 50 quid a month to help us deal with the cost of living crisis. Before I just want to highlight this story, which is interesting. It's not related to the cost of living crisis, but it says here, Labour says it will vote against Northern Ireland Troubles Bill because it equates soldiers with terrorists. In the Commons, MPs are debating the second reading. This is happening at the moment, I think. The second reading of the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill. The legislation is intended to address the long-standing problem of how to deal with unsolved killings that occurred during the Troubles. So the Troubles, obviously, the period from 1969 to 1994, when there was a war going on between the IRA and other Republican organisations and the British government, and loyalist paramilitaries as well. Boris Johnson has been under particular pressure from Tory MPs angry about army veterans being investigated in relation to incidents that occurred decades ago. Last year, the government proposed that it would have an effective amnesty in relation to all offences committed during the Troubles, but that plan was widely criticised, and instead the new bill will only grant immunity from prosecution to people who cooperate with the new Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery, which will try to establish the truth behind unsolved killings from that period. In his speech opening the debate, Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, defended the plans on the grounds that the current system was not providing answers or justice for people who lost relatives during the Troubles. This is a very difficult issue to deal with. Do you provide amnesty for people who were murderers? Many of these people were murderers. Do you provide amnesty to them in order to get information on how people died or who were killed? In some cases, maybe there's some people still missing. It's very difficult, but the response from, it says here, but Peter Kyle, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, said Labour would be voting against the bill because it equates those who served in the armed forces with terrorists. But it doesn't. This is a very weird take. My party will be voting against the bill today because of the equivalence that it gives to people who served in the armed forces to those who committed acts of terror. Wow, okay. For the incredibly low threshold, the remembering that 722 service people lost their lives by acts of terror, and the people who committed that against our armed forces could get immunity from prosecution with the very lowest of possible thresholds. That is what we will be voting against today. That's a weird take, because it's not about... So does he not understand that you're letting people off who committed murder, irrespective of whether you call them terrorists or not? There are members of the British Armed Forces that murdered people. There are also members of the IRA and loyalist paramilitaries who murdered people. And the whole idea behind this would be allowing them amnesty in order to gain more information about what happened. I'm torn on this, because it would be good to be able to provide closure for many families. But if it's not possible, then one possible way of doing this is to provide amnesty. I can't come down on either side here and make a decision. I don't know enough about this. But it is concerning that the response from the Labour Party is, are you calling soldiers terrorists? But it's not. It's about whether people who committed murder should get off with it. Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. The UK Army did perpetrate acts of terror. Yes, and that's true. It's not that there were acts of terror from the loyalist paramilitaries and the IRA only. The British Army also conducted acts of terror, perpetrated acts of terror as well. So if you perpetrate acts of terror, then in a sense you are a terrorist. But anyway, it's not related exactly to what I wanted to talk about, but it just popped up on the feed. Okay, so I want to move on to... Thanks, Gareth, for that super chat. I want to move on to this clip from Byline TV, where they spoke to voters about Boris Johnson's party.
Is a total hypocrite, and he's got away with murder, and he should have gone a long time ago.
Now I'm not going to vote Conservatives this time.
Doesn't surprise me at all. It's been obvious from the start what happened.
Up north, I think he's lost a lot of votes again.
And do you think he should resign?
He shouldn't still be there to resign. He should have resigned ages ago. I think anyone in the country don't have to live in Uxbridge to know that he needs to go.
I think it's not really setting the best example, and it makes you think, well, what else is going on behind the scenes that we don't see? So I would say I don't hold him in a particularly high esteem.
Well, he's having a party, right? There's no ifs and buts. Yeah, you can clearly say he's got a glass in his hand.
Oh yeah. There you go.
These pictures were taken during
Was it lockdown?
Yeah.
He's just a bit of a twat, isn't he? Hypocrite. It's a hypocrite. Big fat hypocrite.
He's the lawmaker for the country. He can't deny that. I mean, say, come on, it's so clear what he says. I can't say more.
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
Well, who knows? Who knows? It's with their conscience. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go now.
Yeah, I do think he should resign, because I think that position requires a person of responsibility, dignity and integrity.
Well, it's the same old really, isn't it? So, no surprises anymore.
Oh, I just think it's disgraceful. I mean, I'm young and I still didn't go out. Yeah. I still didn't go out when lockdown was happening, and you'd think that the young people would be the ones to go out.
And they were effectively blaming the young people and saying,
you
need to stay inside, don't go outside.
I remember this. I remember the Tories, saying, and the young people, of course, they're going to break the law. They're not able to, to follow the rules, things like that. When it was Boris Johnson, front and center breaking the rules.
But then they're having parties.
He's the one going out having a party, and
Do you think he should resign?
yeah, 100%. I do not like Boris Johnson in any way,
and
shape.
he's been MP for so long, and he did questionable stuff when he was
He's done a lot of questionable things and nothing happened to him, but the second someone else did something questionable, they had everyone all over them.
I feel like if this had come out at the time, it would be like people wouldn't have questioned it and said resign.
Yeah, I think she made a valid point here, but if all this information had come out back in 2020, Boris Johnson broke the rules in 2020, there would have been much more pressure on him to resign. Now, and I said this at the time, I knew that, whatever happens, whatever Boris Johnson did during the pandemic, if there's an eventual inquiry, it will be so far in the future that people will have forgotten about it. And, a lot of people, the response from a lot of people is, it was just a piece of cake, or it was just a glass of wine, or obviously missing the point. But this idea that, he's the one who created the rules, and he broke the rules. And it's not just he made a mistake once or twice. There are allegations of parties every bloody week. Here is Peter Bonehead, as I like to call him, defending it. We have Gareth, thanks so much once again. Matt Hancock, don't kill your granny's kiddies. Yes. Oh my goodness, yeah. Matt Hancock. The good old days with Matt Hancock. Now he's in the back benches, but I remember him, this whole idea of you have to follow the rules because it's going to risk the lives of other people. Think of your elderly grandparents. You don't want to go out, catch the virus and bring it home and put their lives at risk. And as someone said in the chat, let the bottles pile high. A wonderful phrase. Something you should put on a t-shirt, maybe. Magic, thanks so much for that super chat. It's breaking the law, plain and simple. Yes, breaking the law. Just imagine if Theresa May had broken the law. She would have resigned. David Cameron broke the law. He would have resigned. Or they would have been forced out by the party or by MPs in general. They would have been hounded out of Parliament. But Boris Johnson, and I think we get back to this Brexit idea once again, this Brexit mentality of, he's the one who got Brexit over the line. He can't go because he got Brexit done. It's like the MPs owe him something, and some MPs definitely owe him their seat. If you look at the numbers that came in 2019, those MPs would never have won on their own. They won because of Boris Johnson, and they won because of Brexit, getting Brexit done.
Peter Bone, do you have any idea of what the explanation might be why some people at that event may have been charged and others weren't? They were all at the same place.
Clearly the police spent £500,000, 12 detectives, many weeks of investigation, and decided what the Prime Minister attended for a short period of time was clearly a works event. Now,
so the other people broke the law, but Boris Johnson didn't break the law because he only broke the law for a very short amount of time. So if you are robbing a bank in a team of people and you just pop your head inside the door, you're part of the team, but you pop your head inside the door and have a look around, well, you can get off because you weren't in the bank all the time. That's the excuse? That's his reasoning? Peter Bonehead's response is because Boris Johnson wasn't there all the time for all of the period. And obviously Peter Bonehead doesn't understand what really went on there because he wasn't, unless he was there. Was he there? No, but he's making up these excuses even though he wasn't there.
that's what the Prime Minister says, and I happen to believe the Prime Minister and the Metropolitan Police. All these people that demanded the police investigate, and now when they haven't got the outcome they want, they're blaming the police. I mean, that's outrageous.
It's not outrageous. How do you explain the police not prosecuting someone who was at the party? They prosecuted everyone else, but they didn't prosecute one individual. Why did they not do that? Is it because that individual is the Prime Minister? Is it that because that individual put pressure on the Metropolitan Police not to issue another fine to him. It's all very suspect.
It's outrageous, Mr. Grieve. You were smiling away during that. I mean, do you not think that the Met were rigorous enough?
Well, if the Metropolitan Police have, as has been suggested, issued a fine to an individual who attended this event, then it must be the case that they have concluded that the event was an unlawful party. So I'm afraid I disagree with Peter on the basic premise that this was an acceptable work event. Obviously, if they've issued no fine to anybody for this event, Peter might be right. But on the basis that they have, in fact, fined some or one of the participants, then it's quite plain that the basic building block of what Peter's saying is wrong. And I think any member of the public looking at this will find it impossible to say that this is a work event. It plainly is not. It may be an after-work event. It may involve people who've been at work, but it's not. They're not there working. They're there having a party. And I think the photographs make that quite clear. And that then adds to the fact that the Prime Minister, if that's correct, misled Parliament in breach of his own ministerial code when he answered questions, firstly denying there had been any parties, and then saying, well, whatever happened, the rules weren't broken, when in fact he attended and he must have known very well that the rules were being broken.
And the original premise of Dominic Grieve's point, of course, makes complete sense. If the police issued a fine, obviously the gathering was illegal. That was why the person received the fine. That's why a number of people received fines. So if Boris Johnson was at the event, why did Boris Johnson not receive a fine? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Let me read some of your comments. I care about the Mayor of London costing me thousands of pounds. Dominic Grieve is right, yes. Was any work done in Downing Street? I've seen more evidence that none was done. They say you get the government you deserve, and I can't argue with that. Can you think of a more incompetent government? Boris Johnson at the top, Nadine Dorris, Dominic Raab, people like this. These are the people who are in charge. George Eustace. I'm trying to just names that come into my mind. These are the ones who are running the country. My mind is blown, but for different reasons, I expect. Grieve is totally correct. He doesn't care. It's not the first time he was... the first time he was prepared to break the law. For example, with Northern Ireland EU regarding Brexit. Yes, they were talking about breaking international law in a limited and specific way. They were talking about breaking the law. Now, they eventually didn't do it, but it was a threat that was on the table. And, Boris Johnson, yes, Boris Johnson, as we saw at the very beginning of the stream, he's willing to throw anyone under a bus in order to save himself. And I think either what's going to happen is you're going to see over the next number of days, this rollout, as Reagan Elite said, this rollout of a cost of living package worth billions, or you're going to hear about somebody who's going to apologize, somebody who's going to be the sacrificial lamb. I think it's more likely there's going to be the distraction, and that would be this cost of living bonus. But then we'll have to see what's actually contained within it. But of course, it's been rolled out exactly at the time when Boris Johnson's in trouble. It could have been rolled out a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago. The cost of living crisis has been going on for a long time now. Why are they waiting until just now? Since they got rid of the badger baiting and cockfighting, watching the parliamentarians of Little Britain is my favourite blood sport. If this was a show on TV, you'd say that Boris has plot. Well said, Nicholas, yes. Oh my goodness. Please send out that gorgeous Nadine Dorman to explain. I need the humor. Has Boris benefited from the Ukraine crisis? Very well. He did for a little bit, but when he met with Zelensky for a few days, and then there was the talk of Boris was leading the way, leading the charge against Russia, and now that's sort of fallen by the wayside, fallen into a ditch. Is there anyone who knows less than Doris? I think Doris is really, she puts it down to dyslexia, but in reality, it's much different. It's a very different problem. She operates at a different wavelength. Let me just put it that way. Always seems drunk. Sometimes. Is not always drunk, but usually it seems. There was not a famous singer, magician, or other entertainer. I'm not sure about that. Only fools and horses. The Healy Rays and the rural independent TDs, including Matty Indoleran, would be a better fist for running the government than the current crop of Tories. Jackie Healy Ray and others, they were entertaining. I haven't followed them recently, but I see that his son is a carbon copy of Jackie Healy Ray. I don't know what the son's name is, but something Ray. But he seems a carbon copy of his father or uncle or whoever it was that came before. Gareth MacDonald, thanks so much for that super chat once again. They blame the police when they don't get what they want. Well, bugger me in Burnley. They are channeling their inner Brexiteer now, aren't they? Yes. It's all about distracting. It's all about, there's nothing to see here. And when it comes to Brexit, of course, they never describe the problem. They say it's because of something else. And you saw here with Peter Bonehead, who was saying that, if Boris was there and he didn't receive a fine, then there's nothing to see here. Obviously, he did nothing wrong. He just popped in for a few minutes. The police understood that and they let him off because he didn't break any rules or break any laws. Max, have you tried being overly angry on Twitter? I'm usually quite angry on Twitter. It's a mental problem with Nadine, nothing more, nothing less. The Met need investigating. Who should do that, Chris? I think Boris will go when retail sales fall off a cliff due to the heavily reduced disposable income and hitting their share portfolios. Yeah, I think there's probably a recession just around the corner. The governor of I'm going to cover that a little bit later in the stream, but the governor of the Bank of England is looking at perhaps engineering a recession, which would be extremely concerning because at the moment you have high prices, but you have, almost full employment. Now, of course, the employment is not great because a lot of people are working 2 or 3 jobs. Many people are on 0-hour contracts. But according to the statistics, employment is high. But if you have a recession where the government the central bank, the Bank of England, increase interest rates, it takes money out of the economy. It's usually used to take the heat out of so the economy is overheating, increase interest rates, it takes money out of the economy, it slows it down, but you can't slow down an economy that's not going quickly at the moment. The problem at the moment is inflation is not due to high wages. It's due to energy prices. And those energy prices are affecting everything. Because if you're making tables, you need to use energy to create those tables, and that cost has to be passed on. If you're growing vegetables in a greenhouse, you need to heat the greenhouse. during the colder periods. That's a cost that has to be passed on to the consumer. And if the role of if the idea, well, I'll get to that in a moment, but if the idea behind increasing interest rates is to dampen that, it's not going to work, because you don't control the rate, you don't control the price of fuel, or gas or electricity, gas or petrol or oil. You don't control the price of that because it's been imported generally. UK Werner, thanks so much. UK Werner, thanks so much for that super chat. Commentators should not treat these Tories as equals, but intellectually and emotionally from top to bottom, slowly detaching from these parasites. Not sure how to respond to that. They should not be treated as equals. I'm not sure I understand your comment. I want to understand it so I can respond better. Commentators should not treat these Tories as equals, but intellectually and emotionally from top to bottom. If I understand correctly, and you can correct me you don't need to send another super chat, but I'll try. You can write in the chat. But I think what the Tories say and what they do are always something completely different. So they will say, yes, we care about the poor and the working class, but their voting record is the complete and utter opposite. They will say that they understand the struggles of ordinary people, but some of them, ones in the House of Lords, for example, claiming up to £300 a day, those in the House of Commons with expenses of hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. They will say that they understand the problems of ordinary people, but there are two things to look at: their actions, their rhetoric, and their voting record. Thanks for that super chat. Yeah, but Starmer had a beer. Number 3, thanks so much for that super chat. The Tories will invest in insulation everywhere. Yes. So there's talk of imposing a windfall tax. This is something that the Tories have been dead set against. Now it's not exactly the same as a windfall tax, but back in 1981 or 1982, I don't remember the year exactly, but Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor brought in a levy on banks and raised £400 million at the time, which was a lot of money back in 1981 and 82. So this was the idea of where the economy is doing pretty bad. There is high inflation. We need to help people out. Let's impose this levy. It was like a windfall tax. Not exactly a windfall tax, but something similar. And if Thatcher did it back in 81 or 82, surely the Tories can do it today. But a problem with the Tories doing it is that the Labour Party have raised it as an issue, raised it as something that the Tories could do, the government could do. So if they do it, then the Labour Party should claim victory here. They should cheer in the House of Commons, cheer Boris Johnson when he says, I'm going to impose a windfall tax, and say, thank you. Finally, you have listened to us. Finally, we have some influence over you. That's what I would say. Show the public that you are the ones who introduced this idea, not Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson will try to claim responsibility for it. If Pretty has anything to do with it, they will rebrand the windfall tax and announce it as something else when Sue Gray is published. Yeah, I think a lot of you guys are seeing the same sort of thing, that there's something coming down the road as a distraction. So when the Sue Gray report is published, Boris Johnson on the same day will say, look, we have this wonderful, I benefit for the public, the cost of living levy or the cost of living grant or something like that, that will be introduced. Now it's going to be paid for by those who have lots of money. Struggling to heat your home? Why not try all the hot air and bluster from the Conservative Party front benches? And the back benches too, don't ignore those as well. So guys, we're about halfway through the stream, so I want to share with you this funny video, and then we'll be back in just a jiffy on the issue of cost of living. And then we'll talk also a little bit about Brexit. So enjoy.
Emotionless greeting, deep breath, gritted teeth. Obviously delighted to be the latest cannon fodder sent over the top into no man's land to defend the Prime Minister, only to be shredded to bits by the machine guns of public disgust. Clarifying that despite fake news reports, WTF doesn't mean Wine Time Friday. It actually means, where's the fridge? Slight nasal whine, weakly insisting that nobody cares about PartyGate anymore, and it's merely coincidence that it's the most read story on literally every single news website in the UK. Note to self, must take more control over UK news media. Taking question from hemp-wearing, chia seed-sucking, avocado-smashing, traitorous lefty commie scum journalist.
I'm from The Telegraph.
The Telegraph, yes.
Wondering how, repeating slowly for effect, how you can still defend the Prime Minister.
Insisting he can't possibly have been air quotes partying because he was grieving for his mother, who had both died and not died and was just about to die at that stage.
And do you really believe that?
Unconvincing, yes, actually.
Really?
Flustered chuckle. Yes.
Oh, come on.
All right, fine, he's all we've got. He's all we've got.
Has this been very upsetting for you? And have you anything else to say in your defence? Minister, thank you.
Ugly sniff. Hoping outburst of emotion plays well in polls for my upcoming leadership bid. Matt Hancock wipe. Next, taking unjustified credit for the opening of Elizabeth Line this week, spouting bollocks about how it's a good thing for the whole country because people in Penrith will definitely benefit from a new train line in London. And noting, with some concern, the energy price cap increase to £2,800. Thankfully for us MPs, that's easily covered by a recent pay rise. The rest of you may very well be fucked. Itchy nod? Oh, painful, thank you. Oh.
Wonderful. Okay, moving on. As he was talking about the...
Well, let's bring...
The price cap. He's got it 4 days ago. Where's the fridge?
More on that breaking news now from the Ofgem Chief Executive Jonathan Brearley, who's told the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee that the regulator is expecting an energy price cap increase in October in the region of £2,800. The current price cap, £1,971.
Conditions have worsened in the global gas market with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Gas prices are higher and highly volatile. At times, they've now reached over 10 times their normal level. Now, I know this is a very distressing time for customers, but I do need to be clear with this committee, with customers and with the government about the likely price implications for October. Therefore, later today, I will be writing to the Chancellor to give him our latest estimates of the price cap uplift. Now, this is uncertain. We are only part way through the price cap window, but we are expecting a price cap in October in the region of £2,800.
Well, let's bring our economics and data editor, Ed Conway. Ed, this is a huge amount of money that families are going to have to pay for their energy, isn't it?
I mean, these are staggering sums. We have never seen a period like this with gas bills quite as high as they're heading, gas and energy bills. And, you know, it's worth just kind of taking a step back. You know, not long ago, you were talking about kind of levels that were, you know, pretty much at a third of what we are going to be seeing later on this winter. And it does just underline the scale of the impending cost of living crisis. Already energy bills are at, for many households, unbearable levels. And the fact that they're going to go up by another around £800 in the autumn, as far as the current futures prices suggest, will be another blow. It's worth just underlining, how...
£800? £800 it's going up. And as he said, a lot of people are struggling at the moment. So what are they going to do? There's no, as Martin Lewis said, he has no more tools left to help people get around this. There is no way around this. This is going up £800. So how are people supposed to deal with this? The solution is to stop using energy. But you'll still have to pay the standing charge unless you disconnect completely. People will... this is going into autumn, which is going to get cold again. This is where it's necessary for the government to intervene. They need to provide... They need to do what the French government did, was to impose a limit on how much the prices could go up. But they need to provide support. They need to provide massive support to people. Because if people are up until this stage deciding, okay, I'm not going to heat my home, I'm going to feed my family, I'm going to wear a coat inside and outside, I have my indoor coat and my outdoor coat, is this what the Tories want? How far can they push people? Well, where is the breaking point? At what point will people say, enough is enough, we want help? If you don't provide us with help, we're going to march on Westminster or something. I know that they've made protesting illegal, but if enough people turn up, they don't have enough police officers to stop them all. So this, once again, this idea that things are going to become more and more expensive, even though people at the moment are struggling.
How does this work? Basically, those energy bills, or indeed the price cap, is set on the basis of what's happening in wholesale gas markets. And if you look at what's happening to futures prices, which is kind of what a lot of the energy companies end up paying, they are very high. And the upshot is, you can see it there, if there were a £2,800 price cap, as the head of Ofgem is saying, then if you're just looking at the share of our energy bills as a share of our total spending, we'll just have a look. That dotted line goes up to the highest level, kind of around 8% of total spending across average households. The highest level we've ever seen before. The dotted line that's further down is kind of where we are at the moment, so the highest since the mid-1980s. But we're heading into unprecedented territory, and that's why there's potentially a lot of extra pressure on the Chancellor to act. £2,800, not necessarily a surprise. I mean, the Bank of England has been talking about that level in its recent forecast. But remember, it was that level that was going to prompt a potential recession in the UK. So we are now heading for those kind of levels that are really damaging and really difficult for many households. And worth just noting as well, what I showed you a moment ago was the average household, if there is such a thing. If you're talking about for many other households, particularly those on lower income brackets, it is a much greater proportion of their spending, just because energy costs make up a greater proportion. Energy and food, another thing which is going up a lot in price. So all of this underlining why we are seeing more noises from the Chancellor about potentially doing more in the way of intervention later on this year.
There needs to be some sort of intervention. There has to be an intervention, but it has to be a significant intervention, because if bills are going up £800, you need to provide people with at least £800 to allow them to stay where they are. Is Rishi Sunak going to give people £800? I don't know. I don't think so. It's not the Tory way. Is he going to miraculously bring out a UBI, which would help a lot, which would help so many people? That's not the Tory way either. But there needs to be something. And there's nothing, which is extremely concerning. Staying with the cost of living crisis and the Bank of England, it says here, rate cuts and money printing not to blame for soaring inflation, says Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey. The Governor of the Bank of England denied it was to blame for soaring inflation after price rises hit 40-year high last month. Speaking at a conference in Vienna, Andrew Bailey hit back at claims that the central bank's decision to print billions of pounds during the pandemic and slash interest rates to record lows had served to fuel the rapid rise in inflation. Last week, Lord King, who was governor in 2008 when the financial markets crashed, said the Bank of England's decision during the pandemic helped to push up inflation. But yesterday, Bailey said, "What I reject is the argument that our response to COVID, the bank's monetary policy committee, let demand get out of hand and thus stoked inflation. The facts simply do not support this." Instead, Bailey attributed the rise in prices to the very tight labour market, which has been blamed for helping fuel inflation by pushing up wages as firms have battled to attract and retain staff amid a shortage of workers. So one of them is saying that, well, the reason why there's inflation is because of the pandemic and the Bank of England's the government handing money over to companies. Some people made a lot of money. It was not some money went to the ordinary people who were on furlough got some money. They were able to get by. That was eventually taken away. But how much money was funneled into private companies like Dido Harding's consultancy firms? You know, the £37 billion was handed over to Dido Harding and she gave it away. And, you know, what happened to that money? But that's the argument from the previous governor of the Bank of England. The current one says, well, it's because of a tight labour market. So he's not even actually blaming the cost of living crisis and inflation on energy prices. When in reality it's energy prices. People's wages have not gone up. They haven't gone up at the same rate as inflation. Because if people's wages went up above inflation, then you could say, well, the problem here is the wages. But people's wages have not gone up to even match inflation. People are earning less. They've taken a pay cut. Because if you're on £1,000 a month and inflation is at 8%, means every month you're 8% less. You have 8% less in your pocket. Now, if your wages go up by 1%, then you're 7% less worse off. The only way you actually see yourself gaining more money is if it's above 8%, if your pay increase is above 8%. Gareth McDonald, thanks so much. That Super Jet Mum's disability was slashed by £150 a fortnight at the beginning of the month. Now she's got to pay back 5 years' worth of overpayment, while all the while the cost of living is going one way up. This is disgraceful. So her disability benefit has been cut by £150 a fortnight. Why are they cutting it? This is the wrong time to be cutting welfare support. Well, disability support or welfare or any type of welfare. The government should be increasing it, not cutting it. And this is the problem. It's about, Rishi Sunak says we have to make cuts because we spent so much money on the cost on the pandemic. We gave so much money to Dido Harding. Now we have to cut it from somewhere. And of course, instead of increasing taxes on the multimillionaires and billionaires like himself, no. What we're going to do is, and this is what the Tories do every time they're in power. They take money from people who don't have money and they give it to people who do. The people during the pandemic who made the most money already had lots of bloody money. And now, who's paying for the pandemic? Paying for that disaster capitalism? Paying for that fraud? Because how many contracts were given out, PPE contracts, for example, were given out to friends and donors of the Conservative Party? There was no tendering process. How many stories have we heard about where there were people who had never been involved in PPE were given contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds. And even one of a member of the House of Lords was involved in that as well. Disgraceful. It's absolutely disgraceful that the people who need the money at the moment are having it cut, and the people who don't need the money at the moment are not being affected. Bailey had previously attracted criticism for advising people not to ask for large pay rises, to help combat inflation, despite earning over £500,000 a year through his job as governor. So Andrew Bailey earns over £500,000 a year, and he was recently telling people, don't ask for a high pay rise because it will contribute to inflation. But if inflation, as I said, is at 9% and people's pay rise goes up even, it'd be wonderful if your pay rise was, your pay increase was 5%. In most cases, it's not anywhere near that. You're still 4% worse off. It's okay for him to say that. He's on £500,000 a year. Now that's his wage, that's his salary. Obviously, he has money somewhere else. He has investments, he has, property or something. I'm sure he's not just living on £500,000 a year. He also warned the UK was facing very big negative impact on incomes as a result of the cost of imports, particularly energy. We're in a period of rapid rising energy goods and some food prices, he said. This is by far the main cause of high inflation and is painful, particularly for those less well off. Bailey added that it was expected to weigh heavily on demand and did not rule out raising interest rates further to help cool inflation. But this is not cooling inflation if the inflation is driven by something external. I'm not an economist, but it's like saying, I'm going to, it cost me a lot to put petrol in the car. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut something else to reduce the cost of petrol. No, you're not going to reduce the cost of petrol by cutting something else. You have no impact on the price of petrol. And these people are the ones in charge. Thanks for that super chat, Gareth. Anyway. Now, when Andrew Bailey and others said, well, this is, it's high wages that are driving the rate of inflation. Well, it says this is unions angered by number 10. So it's not just Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England. Others have said it, including people in number 10. Unions angered by number 10 remarks about public sector pay stoking inflation. Unions have warned of a hammer blow to morale across the public sector after Downing Street said ministers would have to take into account the risk of stoking inflation when deciding this year's pay awards. A readout of Tuesday's morning cabinet meeting reveals that ministers held a discussion on public sector pay, which would affect government officials, nurses, police, teachers and NHS workers struggling during the cost of living crisis. It came as the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, became the first Whitehall department to announce a recruitment freeze with the threat of more than 90,000 job cuts looming across the public sector. According to Boris Johnson's official spokesperson, at the cabinet meeting, the Prime Minister said that the public are understandably anxious about global cost of living pressures and that the government will continue to support those most in need. Well, obviously not. If they're cutting, somebody, somebody who's disability by £150 a fortnight, then they're not looking after the most in need. The spokesperson said the government has already pledged to increase public sector spending and is awaiting decision by public sector review bodies. However, ministers made clear that the risk of triggering higher inflation must be part of the considerations when deciding pay awards this year. This is the scapegoat. This is, well, we can't pay people anymore because there's inflation. Yes, but so that means that doctors, nurses, police officers, teachers, nurses, NHS workers will end up worse off, poorer, because if wages don't go up, these workers are going to be 9% worse off this year. 9% poorer. Trade unions acted angrily to the suggestion the public sector workers should bear the responsibility of restraining inflation. The TUC Deputy General Secretary Paul Newark said these claims are nonsense. Making sure people can afford to pay their bills and put food on the table is not going to push up inflation. Inflation is being driven by rising energy costs, not pay demands. Exactly. It's the right... because if it was pay demands, then you would see it everywhere. If it was just pay, then you would just see it in the UK. But inflation is rising everywhere. Why? Because of the cost of energy. And energy, oil and gas is used in the production of raw materials that eventually feed through to the end product, be it cars or food or paper or whatever. National strike walkouts, mass walkouts. As far as I know, national strikes are illegal in the UK, especially if you're a public sector worker, as far as I know. He added, key workers in the public sector have endured a decade of wage cuts and freezes at a time when staff shortages are crippling frontline services. This would be a hammer blow to workers' morale. A cap on public sector pay imposed by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak during the pandemic was only lifted last October. Look, how many people work in the public sector? This could be something that the Labour Party could tap into, a voter bloc that the Labour Party could tap into. If the Labour Party said, we are going to pay you more, we're going to break the pay freezes, we're going to undo the damage the Tories have done, we're going to pay you more. If somebody, doesn't matter if they're a Tory voter or Boris backer, if they're struggling at the moment and somebody's coming along and saying, look, we're going to pay you more, Boris Johnson's not going to pay you more, we will, I think that would flip a lot of people. They would say, yeah, I think I'll back the Labour Party now. But the Labour Party don't seem to be talking about increasing wages. The main civil service union, the Public and Commercial Services Union, on Tuesday backed strike action over the government's plan to peg pay raises at only 2%. The vote would take place at the union's annual conference in Brighton, demonstrates the scale of the anger in Whitehall and beyond the government's offer. The PCS General Secretary Mark Sowatka said that throughout the pandemic, officials had worked hard providing critical frontline services. He added, unlike the Prime Minister, we aren't being distracted by cheese. We kept the country running, providing universal credit to almost 10 million people, furlough to almost 6 million people, keeping our borders open, keeping our roads safe. And yes, this is what they would expect. And a 2% pay increase when inflation is at close to 10% means that they're 8% worse off. If inflation is running at 8%, you need to provide people, if you have the ability to provide them with a pay increase, it has to match inflation, at least for them to keep their head above water. Peg it to inflation. So this year people get a pay increase. Next year, if inflation drops down to 2%, then people will get a pay increase of 2%. This is the way it should be. Cheese moment. Labour are a joke, sir, aren't to be trusted part of the establishment. The DUP are revolting in so many ways. Reopen the workhouses. Don't get Jacob Rees-Mogg on there. He'd be the government. Sorry, the Secretary of State for Workhouses. The DUP are a joke. Defund the Tories. If businesses won't increase your wages, steal stuff from the office and sell it to make up the difference, including computers, etc. Obviously, I'm not advocating for that. you could always come to steal the Irish food, not like they did. Come and steal the Irish food. Yes, I see duped people. Anyway, let's move on. Staying with the cost of living crisis, I wanted to read this one. So Rishi Sunak faces calls to help with living costs as budget deficit lower than forecast. So Rishi Sunak is under a lot of pressure recently to help people out. And it's not within his DNA to help people out, it seems. The Chancellor is expected to come under renewed pressure to offer a larger financial package of support to low-income families suffering from the cost of living crisis after the public sector deficit in April came in lower than expected. And there's a huge problem here with Brexit as well. Brexit is damaging the economy by 4%. The GDP is down 4% permanently because of Brexit. And still no mention of Brexit. You know, the elephant in the room. A lot of this could be undone by rejoining the single market and the customs union. But no, we have to plough on with this absolute disaster. James, thanks so much for that super chat. Electoral reform, proportional representation will give Labour, SNP, Lib Dems and Greens more power. Maybe even bring back the Whigs. Yeah, and this is what I hope is going to happen at the next election. Thanks, James, for that super chat. That's what I hope is going to happen at the next election. That Labour will get over the line. Maybe they'll need support. They'll probably need support from other parties. And one of the first things they do is bring in proportional representation. And if they do that, they would get rid of the Conservative Party. You would end up not having a Conservative Party like the one that Boris Johnson is leading. It would eventually break up into smaller parts. You would have the more extreme, but you'd have the more moderate. And it's likely you could have the Labour Party going into coalition with the Conservatives, but it would be a different Conservative Party under proportional representation. The first past the post is beyond its sell-by date. Its use-by date, sorry. Smuggling food from the EU sounds like a distinct possibility. I wouldn't put it past the Tories. Goes on to say, with the cabinet understood to be concerned about the government's failing poll ratings as the cost of living crisis escalates, the government borrowed 18.6 billion last month, lower than forecast and down by 5.6 billion from a year ago, according to the ONS. The reduction in borrowing potentially hands Rishi Sunak further funds to ease the cost of living crisis, which has hit the living standards of those on low incomes the hardest. However, the improvement in borrowing figures masked weaker than expected tax receipts in April, revealing the impact of Britain's slowing economy on the exchequer. Central government tax receipts of £70.2 billion came in below the forecast of the Treasury's independent forecaster, the OBR, of 72.3 billion. So it's 2 billion, 1.9 billion short. The Treasury's income was also flattened by one-off items that are unlikely to be repeated as the possible recession looms. Local authorities returned a £2.3 billion surplus, larger than the 1.5 billion anticipated by the OBR. The public corporations reported running a balanced budget rather than a £3.7 billion deficit. The survey of private sector activity this month found economic growth slowed to a crawl after a slump in services sector. The S&P Global Chips Flash Composite Purchases Manager Index, that's a mouthful, which gave a snapshot of business orders and sales, plummeted from 58.2 in April to 51.8, much lower than the 56.5 forecast by Citi economists. I think, according to this index, below 50 is a recession, so 51.8 is not good. Manufacturing output continued to grow modestly in April, but inflationary pressures, mostly from imported goods, remained intense and was likely to depress orders and output over the coming months, the survey found. Rishi Sunak needs to do something. Sunak said, so while there's better news for Sunak from revised figures from previous financial year, which showed borrowing for the year of to March was revised down 7.2 to 144.6 billion, though still above the 127.8 billion predicted by the OBR. Rishi Sunak said, while we're doing what we can to help families deal with the rising prices, inflation is also pushing up our spending on debt interest, which is expected to reach 83 billion this year. That must take a balance. We must take a balanced and responsible approach to support people now, while not burdening further generations. And we're on track to drive public debt down by 2024-25. The government's total debt pile, excluding public sector banks, was 2.35 trillion at the end of April, to about 95.7% of GDP. I've said this before. Invest in people and it stimulates the economy. So give people money and they will spend it. Give them a lot of money and they will spend a lot of money. People will not hoard money. This is the difference between handing over billions to corporations or investment banks, financial institutions, and handing over money to the public. Give people, during furlough, what did people do with the money that they received? They spent it. They spent it in the local economy. They went to a restaurant. They did car repairs. They put petrol in their car. They went to the supermarket. They bought a little bit more. They paid off some of their debts. They didn't hoard the money. They spent the money. And this is what you need to do to stimulate the economy. You need to give people money. You keep taking money away from them, obviously they're not going to spend it. And once again, there's this sort of austerity mentality that's creeping in once again, like we saw about 10 years ago. Best way out of a financial crisis is austerity. No, it's the worst thing you can do. It just makes the situation worse. The best way out of a financial crisis is to pump money into people's pockets. Rishi Sunak, computer says no, Sunak, yes. There is another definition of Jubilee. The Queen should be liquidated, the money used to forgive debts. And just as you say about the Jubilee, was it almost £1 billion is going to be spent on the Jubilee when that money could be given to people? And I've said before, it's the Queen's Jubilee. The Queen is a billionaire or close to that. Can't she afford her own bloody Jubilee? Say to the Queen, I'm sorry, can you pick up the tab this year? You know, we've been doing it over the last number of Jubilees. How many Jubilees had she had? So there's the silver, gold, diamond, and whatever this one is. Platinum, I don't know. Plastic, I don't know. Whatever Jubilee this is. Can't she pick up the tab for once? You know? You know, there, as they say, there are no pockets in the habit. Okay, you know, she doesn't need all this money, and she can't take it with her. So, Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. The DUP, the sea border must go, so that we're aligned with GB. Also, the DUP against equal marriage, abortion rights, language legislation, and so on. All things GB supports. Selective sea borders. Yeah, and this is the DUP to a T. The DUP, when it comes to, for example, the Irish language or marriage equality or abortion rights. No, we want a sea border. we're separate. We're not part of the United Kingdom. And then when it comes to Brexit, no, we're part of the United Kingdom. When it comes to the protocol, no, we don't want a sea border. So we're very selective when we want our sea border. When it's about punishing businesses, we want a sea border. When it's about punishing individuals, we want a sea border. Sorry, when it's punishing unionists, in a sense, it's not even punishing, but when we feel that it's punishing unionists, we don't want a sea border. Anyway, businesses in Northern Ireland are doing much better now because of Brexit. Thanks for that super chat, Gareth. The DUP, always good for a laugh. And I think we can move on to the DUP story. The DUP are not very happy at the moment. It's surprise, surprise, So it says here, one-sided, unionists react with scorn as US delegation arrives in Ireland. Cross-party group aimed to shore up support for Northern Ireland Protocol is welcomed in Dublin, but DUP meeting expected to be frosty. No relation to to Lord Frost. Unionists have responded with scorn and skepticism to a US congressional delegation that is attempting to shore up support for the Northern Ireland Protocol. The DUP had led accusations on Monday that the 9-strong delegation, which includes Democrats and Republicans from the House of Representatives and Senate, was partisan and out of touch. They're not doing themselves any favors here, are they? This idea that, so the Americans are coming, the Americans are important, the Americans are powerful, the Americans have a lot of influence, and what's the DUP response? We're going to insult them. Well, this is, the DUP are not the cleverest of people. They campaigned for Brexit, were told Brexit would be a bad idea, it could damage the union. They said, we don't give a crap, we want our Brexit. And now they're complaining that the protocol is damaging the union, which is a consequence of Brexit. No Brexit, no protocol. And they still won't turn around and say, yeah, actually we were wrong, because it's not in their DNA. The DUP and loyalists like that align themselves with the DUP, it's impossible, literally impossible for them to admit that they've made a mistake. Isn't that weird? You probably know people like that. You probably, maybe you have, unfortunately, maybe you have some of them in your family, that people who cannot admit that they were wrong. You know what they're like. So imagine all of these people bunched together, and then they form a party and they call it the DUP. And that's exactly, and can you imagine trying to negotiate with people like that? You know the people I'm talking about. As I said, maybe there's some of them in your family, maybe unfortunately you work with people like this who are always right and never wrong. And even if you show them, look, here is the number here, you're wrong, they will say, no, the number is wrong. Anyway, I just like bashing the DUP. Sorry. Anyway, we're dealing with more American politicians who are one-sided. Gordon Lyons, I've covered him before, an economy minister in the mothballed Stormont executive, told the BBC, we're going to have a particular challenge with Congressman Neal. He said, referring to Richard Neal, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Others such as Jamie Bryson, a prominent loyalist who's not elected, went further and accused Neal, an ally of President Joe Biden, of supporting the IRA. But everyone is support. I support the IRA. That's probably if he heard me speaking, he would say, yeah, Max supports the IRA. Everyone who doesn't agree with him supports the IRA. We're going to be dictated to by some foreign politicians struggling as a surrogate for republicanism. Acting as a surrogate for republicanism. Anyway, the American visitors are in Ireland at the end of a 6-day trip to Europe that includes meetings with the EU's Brexit Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič in Brussels and the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss in London. Imagine, these are important people. I'm not saying that you had to brown nose them, you need to lick their boots or whatever, but these people are important, and when they arrive, you would imagine, okay, they arrive in Dublin, they're welcomed, they're given a pint of Guinness, they're taken on a trip of the the Guinness store and a few places, and then they go to Belfast and they're treated like crap by the DUP. And what do you think they're going to take away from that? Okay, so in Northern Ireland there are two groups. There's the Sinn Féin who welcomed us, and there was the DUP who insulted us. And who should we listen to? I don't know. I'm more likely to listen to people who are welcoming than people who are aggressive. and unwelcoming. Anyway, the visit will be dominated by the protocol, a part of the UK's 2019 divorce treaty with the EU, which avoided imposing a trade and customs border on the island of Ireland by placing it in the Irish Sea. Unionist leaders say it damages the economy, which is false, and undermines the region's position in the UK, which is also false. The UK government has said it does not undermine, the constitutional situation has not changed, and the Northern Ireland economy is doing better than any other part of the United Kingdom. The Americans had advised London not to unilaterally rip up parts of the protocol, saying that it would violate the Good Friday Agreement, which underpins peace in Northern Ireland, and wreck any potential trade deal with the US. Yes and no. So tearing up the withdrawal, the protocol will not violate the Good Friday Agreement, but it could eventually lead to that. That's the problem. It's not so. I'm not criticizing the Americans here, but I have this fear that people like Joe Biden and others have a very, not simplistic idea of how things work, but a very high level understanding. And the problem with Northern Ireland is it's extremely complicated. I think it's too complicated for many people within Whitehall. Boris Johnson, Northern Ireland is too complicated for Boris Johnson. It's too complicated for many people within the Conservative Party. That's why they really don't comment that much on it, because they don't understand it. It's extremely complicated, and it needs to be dealt with in a very delicate way. Otherwise, you risk, and even the EU don't fully understand the complexities. That's why they rely on the Irish government, when they want to make a decision. Remember, over a year ago, they didn't do it, but they were considering triggering Article 16 over medicines, and the Irish government said, no, bad idea, don't do that, and they took a step back and they didn't do it. There was, a voice of reason in the room. Not a voice of reason, but there was somebody who said, look, no, if you do this, these are the consequences. So they took a step back, probably because they didn't fully understand the impact it would have. So it's important that there's somebody there to explain it to them. And I think it's important for the Americans as well that they have somebody explaining the complexities. Anyway, it says the Americans have advised... I think it's best... so the Americans advised London not to rip up. I think it's best wherever there's a difference of view to sit down across the table and negotiate towards a common purpose. This is the history we celebrate when we think of the benefits of the Good Friday Agreement, the Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee told RTE. The delegation met the Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald and the Taoiseach Micheál Martin on Monday. Both lauded the visitors, reflecting a united front between Dublin and Washington on the protocol. Negotiation, not unilateral action, the way forward, Martin tweeted. And this is something, once again, Ireland is the Irish government in particular, is in a very privileged position, because it's like a go-between between the EU and the US, and it's also a go-between between the UK and the EU. I've said before how the UK has Ireland on its side when it comes to dealing with the problems of the protocol. It wants to help the UK implement the protocol. It understands, look, the protocol is here to stay, but if we can have some sort of influence over the EU, if we can put pressure on them, or if we can ask them to change things on your behalf, we're willing to do that. The Irish government has said that on numerous occasions. Now, behind closed doors, that's probably what's happening. On the surface, the Brexiteers are saying, we want Ireland to leave the EU. We want the EU to crumble into dust. But the reality is they have an ally to a certain extent when it comes to dealing with the protocol. And they sort of trashed that whole relationship, unfortunately. Freddie, thanks so much for that super chat. Unless you've lived in the north, you don't know. No, unless you've lived in Northern Ireland, you don't know the complexities of it. I've never lived in Northern Ireland. I've lived close to the border. I lived in Monaghan for a while. It's not Northern Ireland, but I remember passing. To get there, you had to pass through Fermanagh. And I remember at the time in the mid 1990s when there were British soldiers on the border, and sometimes I was stopped in my car on my way to Monaghan, and they would ask me where I'm going and what I was doing. It was on a very rare occasion. Most of the time they were just driving around, but thankfully that is no longer the case anymore. And it's important that we don't go back to that. And it really frustrates me when I hear people like Ben Habib or other Brexiteers in Britain who don't understand Northern Ireland, don't understand the peace process, don't understand what's come before, talking about, we just need to get Northern Ireland out of the single market and the customs union. We need to keep, Northern Ireland has been annexed by the EU. It's been invaded by the European Union. Ireland wants to drive a wedge between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. This sort of rhetoric, they think it means nothing, but it's very dangerous rhetoric to be using in reference to Northern Ireland. Garrett, thanks so much once again for that super chat. Garrett says, every treaty issues, right? If the Northern Ireland Protocol has issues, wouldn't it be surprising, by the way? Invoke Article 16, convene the committee, use the agreed routes to resolution. EU, UK have no need to override it. Yes, the concern the EU have with the UK triggering Article 16 is that they will use it to block progress on the rest of the protocol. That's my feeling. That's my take on it. So the Article 16 can be triggered, but what it does is it starts a process of negotiation. But you have to have a reason to do it. You can't just trigger it on a whim. And it brings the joint committee together. They have to discuss what the problem is, try and find a solution. It has to be completed within a time frame. A solution has to be found within a time frame, but it doesn't affect the rest of the protocol. And I think the concern for the EU is that the UK government will trigger Article 16 and then refuse to go ahead with the rest of the implementation of the protocol while that aspect of Article 16 is triggered. And I think that's why the EU is saying, no, we don't want you triggering Article 16, because they don't trust them. And I wouldn't trust the UK government. They said they were going to break international law in a limited and specific way. They talked about triggering Article 16 a dozen times at least last year. And they're talking about renegotiating the withdrawal agreement and acting unilaterally. So if you're talking about acting unilaterally, then you're not trustworthy. Just staying one final Brexit story before we finish tonight. This is a little bit sad, and it's I would like this individual to be reinstated. But this is some of the fallout over the Northern Ireland Protocol. This is Cambridge University astrophysicist loses space project role amid Brexit row. Nicholas Walton gives up leadership of £2.8 million pan-European research after dispute over Northern Ireland Protocol. Cambridge University astrophysicist studying the Milky Way and hoping to play a major part in the European Space Agency's next big project has been forced to hand over his coordinating role on the scheme after a row over the Northern Ireland Protocol arrangements put science in the firing line. Nicholas Walton, a research fellow at the Institute of Astronomy, reluctantly passed his leadership role in the €2.8 million pan-European Marie Curie network research project to a colleague in the Netherlands on Friday. The European Commission has written notifying him UK scientists cannot hold leadership roles because the UK's membership of the flagship £80 billion Horizon Europe funding network has not been ratified. Walton, who was to lead a doctorate network related to ESA's Gaia mission that is mapping nearly 2 billion stars in the Milky Way. He is one of just a handful of British physicists approved for the HE grant, but must now take a passenger seat in his own project. The government blamed the EU. Brussels has delayed associate membership of Horizon Europe, agreed in the trade deal in December 2020, while the Northern Ireland Protocol row remains unresolved. Frankly, I think he should have remained in his position. He was the right person for the job. I disagree with the idea of removing him. I understand, look, the UK is no longer a member of the European Union, but also the fact that the UK is playing stupid games over the Northern Ireland Protocol. And if the UK is willing to break international law, then there's a risk to the withdrawal to the TCA. Because remember, the withdrawal agreement came before the TCA. So if the withdrawal agreement breaks, then the TCA would be suspended. And all of this would come crashing down. And this is something that the EU have said before. So it's more complicated than what appears on the surface. And unfortunately, Nicholas Walton is a victim of this. Who's on the right? In a sense, if the UK had played ball, the UK agreed to the withdrawal agreement, agreed to the protocol. They signed up to that. They're breaking their agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there are consequences for that. Unfortunately, science is suffering the consequences of that as well. And unfortunately, Nicholas Walton, who I imagine is a wonderful scientist, he's suffering the consequences of this as well. Unfairly for him. He wants to do his job. He's not involved in politics. He's not involved in the Northern Ireland Protocol or anything like this. And unfortunately, he's going to be a victim of this. I hope that something can be resolved. I hope that he can be reinstated, because he's committed no crime here. But unfortunately, at the moment, he has been replaced. So guys, we're almost at the end of the stream. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who came on tonight. Have a great week. I hope to see you on Friday. Same bad time, same bad channel. Hope you enjoyed that. So before we finish, we have our one for the road.
Some disturbing new reports coming out of Downing Street. A whistleblower spoke to us on condition of anonymity. His words are spoken by an actor. So, what happened at these events?
There were 30 or more people there, shoulder to shoulder, on people's laps, enjoying a drink, letting their hair down.
Dancing?
Yes, dancing, snogging, vomiting, empty bottles all over the place. Everything you'd expect.
When did you realise that something was wrong?
Not at first, but then I began to notice little details. Laptops on desks, filing cabinets, red boxes.
Ministerial red boxes?
As it turned out, yes. And I began to realise something.
What was that?
That some people thought we were in a workplace, and not a club.
That must have been disturbing.
It was. There we were, having a lovely time without a care in the world, and yet there was this nagging suspicion that some people weren't getting into the spirit of it.
Did that include the Prime Minister?
We would never have called him that, of course. He was DJ Bojo at all times, but now I think about it, maybe I did see him writing something down at one point. Perhaps he was secretly working. Or maybe he was just giving a woman his number.
When was all of this happening?
Doors opened at 4 p.m. most days, but I'm ashamed to say that I think I saw some people on their work email accounts at gone 7.
That must have been very distressing for you.
Yes, I mean literally nowhere else was open, and to think that they were wasting that opportunity, well, it's just criminal.
Yes.
It made a mockery of everything we were trying to achieve.
When you look back at it now, what are your thoughts?
We could have drunk more. We could have done at least another suitcase of wine. We could have broken more swings. And in the end, isn't that the real tragedy?
Thank you, Michael. I mean,
Michael? So guys, once again, wonderful video from Matt. Have a great week. I'll see you on Friday, same bad time, same bad channel. And as always, stay safe and stay alert. Take care. See you soon. Good night.